Well, good afternoon. Welcome back to my Vlogtober post, and this is now the 4th of October, and I am currently standing in the Abbey Gardens in the centre of Abingdon, actually just to the side of the centre of Abingdon. This is a park which is open to the public. There are people wandering around, taking in the nice late September, early October afternoon airs. It's quite cool, but it's not cold at the moment. There's a bit of a breeze, but it's not chilly by any stretch of the imagination. And we have a cloudy, overcast sky, but not with any great trepidation of expectation of storms in the air. You'll notice behind me this rather fanciful range of buildings, or walls even. It's not likely that most of this stonework actually originates in the old abbey. Bits and pieces probably do, but it's thought to be a late romantic folly, effectively. A few of the stones that would have been left over after the abbey buildings were demolished, put together to look like something that it isn't. And the reason we're quite confident it's not, it's on the wrong alignment to be a building of ecclesiastical nature, and yet it has Gothic arches, and it's too small for the size of the abbey that would have been here in the late medieval, early Tudor period. The abbey, I think, was founded in 625 AD, which would mean that it's a West Saxon foundation. It was a Benedictine monastery and has a number of Middle and Late Saxon charters given to it by the various different kings of Wessex. It was in effect refounded in the late Saxon period by the Reformed Benedictines, the first English Reformed of the Benedictines, whose main house was based in Glastonbury, and Abingdon Abbey was the second house of that reform. So it has a fairly major role to play, and after the Norman conquest it continued pretty much as the dominant institution in the town of Abingdon right the way through until 1538, when the last abbot and the last 12 monks of the monastery signed over the deeds to the king and received a pension for their pains. The abbey was then closed, and most of the stonework was used basically as a quarry to build the rather attractive stone-built buildings in the centre of town, which was quite a common phenomenon. Given that this stone that was probably used here would have been the finest Cotswold stone, and there are a number of buildings in Abingdon that have Cotswold stone, it's impossible to know for certain, but the likelihood is that this was a ready-made quarry for them to take advantage. As I say, it's now a park in the centre of Abingdon, and I think you can just see over there's a squirrel running around beneath the trees, and his companion is over on the other side doing pretty much the same thing. There are a few markings in the landscape which are best guesses for where the abbey buildings would have been. There are, however, one or two prominent buildings in Abingdon which were once part of the abbey complex, which are still standing and are still used to this day, but obviously not for the original purposes, all except the parish church of St Nicholas, which is the oldest church in Abingdon, and I'll take you through there at some point and show you, perhaps when I go down to St Helen's church. But just to show you, there are brick outlines of the best guess where the abbey buildings were, but as I say, there's very little left of the original abbey. The other item of interest in this area, I'll just stop the video and restart it facing the other way. So the other main interest item in this area is this statue of Queen Victoria. This statue was erected in 1887 to celebrate Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, and originally it stood in the market square in the centre of Abingdon, but was moved during the Second World War to its current location, where, in order to protect it, on the one hand from bombing, this was, as it is now, a park area and not a particular target of the Luftwaffe, but also because extra water tanks were installed in the centre of the town in order to supply water to the munitions factories and the like that were established during the Second World War. There was a plan in the mid-90s to move this statue back into its original position in the market square, but the prohibitive cost would have cost about £10,000 at least then, and the likelihood of the stone actually not surviving the move meant that it was decided to leave it here and keep it in the gardens as a focal point for people who come to the town. When the abbey was built in the 700s, and for the first 300 years of its existence, it would have been part of the Kingdom of Wessex. The Kingdom of Wessex was one of 4 kingdoms in what now makes up England. There was Wessex, which was basically the south coast from Kent, more or less Kent, all the way up through the southern side of the River Thames, all the way up through the Midlands to the southern side of the River Mersey. The area around London and East Anglia was the Kingdom of Guthrum. The area where Northumberland County and County Durham are now was the Kingdom of Northumberland. What is now Cumbria on the other side of the country from Northumberland was then part of the Kingdom of Strathclyde, which is part of what is now southwest Scotland. And the middle bit, the bit between Northumberland and the Kingdom of Wessex, was known as the Danelaw. And that was because when the Vikings invaded, they eventually settled, and they settled through the whole of the North Midlands and the South Midlands, all the way as far as the River Thames. And the city of Oxford became a significant city at this time, partly because it was the crossroads between the north-south and the east-west roads, but partly also because the River Thames formed the boundary of the Danelaw and the Kingdom of Wessex, and a number of treaties were signed at the Abbey, again which no longer exists, and again where most of the stone, in fact it's been so successfully completely robbed out that archaeologists are not actually certain where Oxford Abbey was, except they know it was in the Osney area of the city, which is just to the west and south of the River Thames. It's just to the west of the city centre and to the south of the River Thames. And the River Thames is the river that's flowing past Abingdon as well. In the 1970s, Abingdon changed its name from Abingdon-on-Thames to Abingdon, in a false sense of egalitarianism, I guess. To take away that sound of pomposity, I suppose. There is an Abingdon in North London, so yes, theoretically the two places could be confused, but the Town Council made that decision. But a couple of years ago they reversed that decision, and the town has reverted to being Abingdon-on-Thames, and that's partly because the town wants to develop Abingdon's marina area and turn it into a destination for the riverboats and tours that come along the river. And indeed, most of our historical buildings in Abingdon are riverside properties. I'm just on one of the little branches off the river at the moment, and I think you can see all the ducks and moorhens and the like that are enjoying a splash about and wondering why I've not got any bread or other tidbits to feed them. So that was a very brief potted history of Abingdon. I'll just go over to the other side now and show you some of the historical buildings that remain from the Abbey complex. So I've just moved down the way slightly. As you can see, that's the folly, the rebuilt bits of masonry from the old Abbey. And just across the way we have what's known as the Cosner's house. I've no idea what a Cosner is, but I will look that up and let you know when I get back. And if we come through here, you'll see a wonderful structure which still stands from the medieval history of the abbey. I can't go in at the moment because obviously it's private property. Well, it's municipal property, but closed unless there is a function going on. And I think you can see from the outside that this is an old building, and there's certainly, I would say, Tudor brickwork in there, but there's probably also quite a bit of earlier masonry, as well as the woodwork to hold the, I would guess at some point in its past that this would be a wattle and daub style building, which has been refabricated to be much more substantial with brickwork. You'll be able to see the unevenness of the wall, and it bulges out everywhere, and some very old woodwork inside. They have various functions and events here which are always very popular and well attended. I'll just move around the corner and carry on this video. So I think if you wanted an example of the fanciful nature of the reclaimed stonework from the old abbey, this wall probably encompasses everything I've been saying. As you can see, there are the old trefoil windows, which would have come from an ecclesiastical building of some sort, but you can see the marked change in the wall line, where this whole upper layer is a new layer. This is not the original. This thin layer here would have been the original wall topper, and this whole extra section of wall has been added on top, and the windows are part of that whole extra section of wall. Now I've come to the other end of the building range that I showed you just before through the railings, and the Unicorn Theatre is housed in one of these buildings, and this is a local amateur dramatic working space. And this footpath actually takes you through the centre of one of the buildings, and this is what actually for me is definitely a ginnel, which is a building that an alleyway that kind of goes through but is covered over the top. Oh, hello puss. Oh, don't worry, you're fine. And this lovely arch which shows that once upon a time this alleyway was much wider, and it brings us out to the upper reaches of the little side tributary of the Thames. This was an old mill house which was turned into a hotel. At the moment it's closed, and I think is going to have some redevelopment, possibly to turn it into flats, but we're hoping it will have some aspect of it which maintains it as a public amenity, because there are very few amenities within Abingdon that are actually down by the river. The road at the end is the main road into Abingdon from the east, and it crosses over Abingdon Bridge, which is just visible through the trees, and there is a pub standing on the bridge which has a beer garden between the two branches of the river as it goes through Abingdon, and that is in fact the only existing amenity for eating and drinking by the riverside at this time. So we'll just go back through the ginnel, and I'll take you to the final part of this tour. This just made me smile as I was walking past. I really have to show a sign of a Baptist church called the Abbey Baptist Church. How times have changed since the Reformation. Well, I'm now at the far end of Abbey Close, and you can see the wall on the left and the Abbey entrance to the Abbey Gardens on the left hand side, and the buildings that are going down to the river on the right hand side. And if I turn around, we can see the Church of St Nicholas and the choir school that's connected to it. We have on this side the Guildhall, which is like an awful lot of the centre of Abingdon, a brutalist construction from the 1960s, which is now being thankfully refurbished and revamped, when a lot of historical buildings were simply demolished in this town by Philistines, frankly. And if we go through here, you'll see ahead is the County Hall. This County Hall was opened in the late 18th century as the Berkshire Assizes, and later the County Hall of the Royal County of Berkshire. In 1974, the government redrew a lot of county administrative boundaries, and Abingdon became part of Oxfordshire and moved out of Berkshire completely. And just behind this bus is the market square where the statue of Queen Victoria stood for the first 70 or so years of its existence before being moved to its current location, the Abbey Gardens. So this is the music school, and as the sign says, founded in 1563 by John Royal. And this is the Church of St Nicholas with its tower. I've never been inside this church. I've been in St Helen's Church, which is the main church in Abingdon, but this is a rather fine building and certainly worth a look. And that really completes my tour of the Abbey grounds. I will cover other parts of Abingdon, including the County Hall, in another video. I hope that you've enjoyed this. As ever, leave any comments down below. And I just need to finish off by apologising to Julie for twice getting her name wrong. The first time mistaking her for somebody else, and the second time simply calling her Jackie instead of Julie. So I hope, Julie, that you will now forgive me for such a terrible lapse on my part. So goodbye everybody, and I look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow. Bye.